I'm standing in my childhood bedroom for the first time in 18 years, and my hands won't stop shaking. The letter in my trembling fingers is written in handwriting I recognize instantly, my father's careful script that I remember from grocery lists and birthday cards before he walked out on us when I was 12. But this letter. God, this letter changes everything. My dearest Margaret, it begins, dated September 15, 1995, 3 months after he disappeared from our lives. I know you told me never to contact you again, but I can't stop trying. Emma needs to know why I had to leave, and that leaving her was the hardest thing I've ever done. The paper crinkles as my grip tightens. The room smells like lavender and cedar, exactly like it did when I was little, when I still believed my daddy would never hurt me. My chest feels like it's caving in because this letter that was never meant for me to see, is telling me that everything I believed about my abandonment was a lie. I drop onto my old twin bed, and the mattress creaks the same way it did when I used to cry myself to sleep, wondering what I'd done wrong to make him leave. But he didn't just leave. He was writing letters. Begging to come home. How do you process learning that the parent you've hated for half your life was actually fighting to get back to you? The words escape as a whisper, but they echo in the empty room like a scream. My therapist always said I have abandonment issues. She was wrong. I have trust issues, because the one person who was supposed to protect me from lies was the one telling them. 15 more letters sit on my dresser, tied with a faded blue ribbon. 15 letters my mother never told me existed. 15 letters that would have changed everything. 3 weeks ago, my life was perfectly predictable, and that's exactly how I liked it. Every morning at 6:30, I'd roll out of bed in my tiny Portland apartment, make the same cup of Ethiopian coffee, and settle into my home office to work on logo designs for small businesses. Freelance graphic design pays the bills and keeps me safely isolated from office politics and complicated relationships. My routine was sacred. Morning jog through Laurelhurst Park, same route every time, earbuds in to avoid small talk with other runners. Lunch at Cafe Luna where Marcus is the barista, knows my order without asking, turkey avocado wrap, no tomatoes, iced green tea. Evenings with Jake, my boyfriend of 2 years, watching Netflix and pretending we didn't both feel the distance growing between us. Jake's a good man, patient, kind, stable. Everything you'd want in a partner. But lately, he'd been bringing up the future more often. Maybe we should get a place together, he'd suggest, and I'd find reasons to deflect. I'm not ready became my default response to everything that required emotional investment. The truth is, I've spent 18 years building walls so high that even I sometimes forget what I'm protecting. My therapist, Dr. Chen, calls it hypervigilance. I call it survival. When people show you they can disappear without warning, you learn to keep one foot out the door at all times. My mother still lives in Salem, our hometown, in the same house where my childhood died. She calls every Sunday, and I answer maybe half the time. When I do pick up, our conversations follow the same script. How's work? Fine. How's Jake? Fine. When are you coming to visit? Soon, maybe. We both know soon means never. I can't explain to her why I can't come home without talking about him, and we don't talk about him. We haven't spoken my father's name aloud in over a decade. David Holloway became a ghost we agreed to pretend never existed. Dr. Chin keeps pushing me to examine this avoidance. What are you afraid you'll find if you go back to Salem? She asked last session. The answer sits in my throat like a stone. I'm afraid I'll remember how it felt to be loved completely by someone who could walk away like it meant nothing. My apartment reflects this carefully controlled existence. Minimal furniture, no family photos, lease renewed month to month for easy escape. I've mastered the art of living like I might leave at any moment, never putting down roots deep enough to hurt when they're severed. But sometimes, late at night when Jake's sleeping beside me and his breathing is steady and trusting, I'll catch myself wondering what it would feel like to stay. To plant something and watch it grow. To believe that maybe, just maybe, not everyone leaves. Those thoughts terrify me more than anything, so I push them down and focus on what I can control: deadlines, coffee temperatures, running times, the safe distance between my heart and anything that might break it again. I thought I was protecting myself. I thought I'd figured out how to live without needing anyone too much. I had no idea that in 3 weeks, a simple knock at my door would prove that everything I'd built my life on was constructed from lies I'd been too afraid to question. It was a Tuesday morning in October when everything changed, though I didn't know it yet. I was hunched over my laptop, tweaking kerning on a logo for a local bakery, when 3 sharp knocks interrupted my concentration. Not the gentle tap of my neighbor Mrs. Kim, but the efficient rap of someone with a schedule to keep. The UPS driver was young, maybe early 20s, with rain droplets beating on his brown uniform. Portland's drizzle had started early that day, turning the world gray and soft around the edges. "Emma Holloway," he asked, "tablet ready?" "That's me." He hefted a package from his cart, heavier than I expected, wrapped in plain brown paper that felt substantial under my fingers. The kind of weight that suggests something important inside. "Sign here, please." His stylus was warm from his grip. But as I scrawled my signature, I noticed the name on the label: Margaret Holloway. Same last name, same address, but definitely not me. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, old-fashioned cursive that reminded me of my grandmother's holiday cards. "Wait," I called as he headed back toward the elevator. "This isn't for me. It's for Margaret Holloway." He paused, 1 foot already in the hall. "Different name, same address. Probably a relative, right? You signed for it, you're good." The elevator dinged, and he was gone before I could protest further. Standing in my doorway, I turned the package over in my hands. The return address made my breath catch: Salem, Oregon. My hometown, the place I'd been avoiding for 2 years now. Something about the package felt magnetic, almost alive. The brown paper was smooth except for one corner where it had been carefully reinforced with tape. Someone had taken time with this, cared about its safe arrival. I should have looked up Margaret Holloway online, should have called the number on the return label. Instead, I carried it to my kitchen counter, where it sat like a question I wasn't ready to answer. For 3 days, I walked past it dozens of times. It seemed to grow heavier each time I glanced at it, more insistent. Jake noticed it Thursday night. "You gonna open that, or just stare at it forever?" "It's not mine," I said, but even to my own ears, the protest sounded weak. So indeed. Because somehow, despite the wrong name, despite my better judgment, despite 18 years of learning not to want things that weren't meant for me, I couldn't stop feeling like maybe, just maybe, this package was exactly where it needed to be. Friday evening, I couldn't take it anymore. Jake was at his weekly basketball game, leaving me alone with the package that had been haunting my kitchen counter for 3 days. My hands shook as I peeled away the tape, telling myself I'd just peek inside and then seal it back up. The brown paper crinkled away to reveal an antique wooden jewelry box, dark cherry with brass corners that had aged to a soft green patina. It was beautiful, the kind of heirloom passed down through generations. A small brass key was taped to the bottom with yellowed Scotch tape. The moment I lifted the lid, I was 12 years old again. Lavender and cedar rushed up from inside the box like ghosts made of scent. My childhood bedroom had smelled exactly like this: the lavender sachets my mother tucked into my dresser drawers, the cedar chest at the foot of my bed where we stored winter blankets. I hadn't smelled that combination in 18 years, and it hit me like a physical blow. My legs went weak. I sank onto my kitchen stool, the box trembling in my hands. Inside was a collection of items that made no sense together but somehow felt familiar: a hospital bracelet, yellowed with age, dated March 1998. A pressed flower, a daisy, perfectly preserved between sheets of wax paper. And underneath, wrapped in tissue paper, a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The ribbon. God, the ribbon. It was the same shade of blue as the hair tie I'd worn every day in 6th grade, the one my father said matched my eyes. The memory surfaced unbidden, him braiding my hair before school, his fingers gentle as he tied that ribbon at the bottom. But it was the handwriting on the top letter that made my world tilt sideways. My father's careful script. Unmistakable, unforgettable, unchanged by the 18 years since I'd last seen it on a grocery list stuck to our refrigerator. The envelope was addressed to my dearest Margaret, but the return address made my vision blur, David Holloway. My father's name. My father who'd walked out of our lives without explanation, without looking back, without ever trying to contact us again. Except, he had tried to contact someone. My fingers fumbled with the envelope, tearing the aged paper. The letter was dated September 15, 1995, 3 months after he disappeared. 3 months after he'd packed his clothes while I was at school and vanished like he'd never existed. I know you told me never to contact you again, the letter began, but I can't stop trying. Emma needs to know why I had to leave, and that leaving her was the hardest thing I've ever done. Emma. My name in his handwriting. He was writing about me. I dropped the letter like it was on fire, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. This couldn't be real. My father never tried to contact us. He never cared enough to explain why he left, never looked back, never showed any sign that abandoning his 12-year-old daughter cost him anything at all. But here was proof in his own hand that I'd been wrong about everything. The hospital bracelet caught my eye again. March 1998. I did the math, that was 9 months after he left. Why would Margaret Holloway have a hospital bracelet from that time? And why was it in a box clearly meant for someone who knew my father intimately enough to keep letters, pressed flowers, and mysterious medical paraphernalia? Who was Margaret Holloway, and why did she have a box full of my father's secrets? My hands shook as I reached for my phone. I had to find her. I had to know what these letters said, what story they told about the father I thought I knew. Because if he'd been writing to someone about me, if he'd been thinking about me after he left, then everything I'd believed about my abandonment was a lie. And if it was all a lie, then I'd spent 18 years hating someone who maybe, had never stopped loving me at all. The next morning, I called in sick to work and dove into finding Margaret Holloway. My laptop screen glowed with search results as I combed through social media, white pages, property records, anything that might connect this mystery woman to my father. Margaret Holloway, 67, Salem, Oregon. Current address, 1247 Elm Street. 3 streets from my childhood home. My stomach dropped. She'd been living practically next door to us all these years? How had our paths never crossed? Salem isn't that big, you can't hide from someone for 18 years unless you're trying. I stared at her phone number on my screen for 20 minutes before I found the courage to dial. My palms were sweating as the phone rang. Hello? The voice was gentle, cultured. Definitely older. Hi, my name is Emma Holloway. I think I received a package meant for you by mistake? A long pause. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted, cautious, almost wary. What kind of package, dear? It's a wooden jewelry box. With letters inside. From someone named David. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Then, barely a whisper, oh my God. He actually sent it. My heart started racing. You know about it? You know my father? Another pause. Your father. Emma, how old are you now? 30. I turned 30 last month. I heard her intake of breath, sharp and surprised. 30. He said, honey, I think you need to come see me. There are things your mother made me promise never to tell. But if David sent that box to your address. Her voice trailed off. What things? What did my mother make you promise? The words came out desperate, pleading. Not over the phone. Can you come to Salem? Today? I was already reaching for my car keys. I can be there in 2 hours. The drive to Salem was torture. Every mile brought back memories I'd spent years burying. The exit sign for my hometown made my chest tighten. I hadn't been back since Jake's graduation party 3 years ago, and even then I'd stayed for exactly 45 minutes. As I drove through familiar neighborhoods, questions hammered at my brain. Who was Margaret to my father? Why was she keeping his letters? And why had my mother who claimed to know nothing about where he went or why he left, made this woman promise to keep secrets? I pulled into Margaret's driveway at 2:30 p.m., my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The house was small, blue with white trim, surrounded by a garden bursting with lavender. The same lavender that had scented the jewelry box. Margaret was waiting on her porch, a petite woman with silver hair and kind eyes that looked familiar somehow. She stood as I approached, her expression mixing relief and apprehension. "Emma," she said softly. "You look just like him. Especially the eyes. How do you know what my father looks like?" I asked, clutching the jewelry box against my chest like armor. She gestured to the porch swing. "Sit down, honey. This is going to be hard to hear." But I couldn't sit. Couldn't be still. "Just tell me. Please. I've spent 18 years thinking my father abandoned me without caring, without looking back. These letters, they say something different. I need to know what really happened." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Your father came to me 18 years ago, right after you graduated high school. He was dying, Emma. Pancreatic cancer. He had maybe 6 months left." The world tilted. "Dying? But he left when I was 12. That was 18 years ago. He'd been sick for 2 years before he left you and your mother. He thought." Margaret wiped her eyes. "He thought it would be easier for you to hate him than to watch him waste away. He wanted to protect you from that pain." I sank onto the porch swing, the jewelry box sliding from my numb fingers. Everything I'd believed, everything I'd built my entire adult life on, crumbled in an instant. "The letters," I whispered. "How many letters are there?" Margaret's voice broke. "Dozens, Emma. He wrote to you and your mother every week for 3 years. Your mother, she was so angry, so hurt. She asked me to keep them, said maybe someday when the pain wasn't so fresh." Someday had finally come. Margaret sat beside me on the porch swing, her hands folded in her lap like she was holding herself together by force of will. The lavender in her garden released its scent with each breeze, and I understood now why that smell had hit me like a physical blow when I opened the box. "I was his hospice nurse," she said quietly. "David came to me in the fall of 2006, when the doctors told him he had maybe 4 months left. 4 months to figure out how to say goodbye to a daughter who thought he'd abandoned her." My throat closed. He was dying alone. Not alone. Never alone. He talked about you constantly, showed me your high school graduation photo so many times I could have picked you out of a crowd. "When you got that scholarship to Portland State," he cried. Happy tears, but still tears. He was so proud. How did he know about my scholarship? The words came out strangled. Margaret's smile was sad and beautiful. "Honey, your father never stopped keeping track of you. He had friends who would send him newspaper clippings, photos from events around town. He knew about your art awards, your college graduation, even when you started your design business. He kept everything in a storage unit." The world spun. Everything I'd believed about being forgotten, abandoned, erased from his life, it was all wrong. But why didn't he contact me? If he was dying, why didn't he tell me? Because he loved you more than his own need to say goodbye. Margaret reached over and took my shaking hands. "He made me promise to wait. He said you needed to be old enough to understand that sometimes love looks like leaving. He wanted you to have a full life before you had to carry the weight of his choices." I was crying now, 18 years of grief and rage and abandonment pouring out of me like a dam had burst. He chose to die alone rather than let me watch him suffer? He chose to let you remember him healthy and strong rather than waste away in a hospital bed. He chose to carry that pain himself so you wouldn't have to. Margaret's voice broke. It nearly killed him, Emma. Leaving you was the hardest thing he ever did. Through my tears, I saw the pressed daisy in the jewelry box with new eyes. The flower. Where did it come from? Your 12th birthday bouquet. He took one daisy before he left, pressed it in his wallet. Carried it for 6 years until the day he died. My heart shattered completely. All those birthdays I'd spent wondering if he remembered, all those graduations and achievements where I'd scanned the crowd hoping against hope to see his face, he'd been remembering, been celebrating, been grieving his absence as much as I was. The hospital bracelet? From his final stay. He wanted you to have something from those last days, some proof that even at the end, you were in his thoughts. I picked up the stack of letters with trembling fingers. What do they say? Everything he wished he could tell you. His hopes for your future, his regret about missing your milestones, his pride in the woman you were becoming. And his reasons, Emma. All the reasons why he made the choice he did. Margaret stood and walked to her garden, giving me space to absorb the magnitude of what I'd learned. My father hadn't abandoned me. He'd sacrificed himself to save me from watching him die. Every assumption I'd made about being unloved, unwanted, easily discarded, it was the opposite of the truth. There's more, Margaret said, returning with a small brass key. He left something for you. A storage unit he's been paying for through a trust. He made me promise to give you the address when you turned 30. She handed me a piece of paper with an address across town. Unit 247. He said everything he couldn't give you while he was alive is waiting there. I stared at the address through my tears, understanding finally flooding through me. The package hadn't been misdelivered at all. Margaret had sent it to my address on purpose, knowing it would bring me here, to this moment, to this truth that would reshape everything I thought I knew about love and loss and what it means to be someone's daughter. My father had been loving me all along. I just hadn't known how to recognize his kind of love, the kind that sacrifices everything, including being understood, to protect what matters most. I sat in my car outside the storage facility for 30 minutes, key in hand, unable to move. The metal was warm from my grip, and I kept turning it over between my fingers like a talisman that might give me courage. What if I opened that unit and found nothing but disappointment? What if my father's version of love was different from what I needed it to be? What if seeing 18 years worth of missed moments hurt more than believing he'd forgotten me entirely? The rational part of my brain whispered that I could drive away right now. Put the key back in the jewelry box, return it to Margaret, and pretend this day never happened. Go back to my safe, controlled life where no one could hurt me because I never let anyone close enough to try. But my phone buzzed with a text from Jake. How's the family stuff going? Love you. Love you. 2 words that used to make me panic, that I'd never been able to say back without feeling like I was handing someone a loaded weapon. Because everyone who'd ever claimed to love me had left, and I'd spent 18 years proving that pattern over and over again by leaving first. Except maybe they hadn't all left. Maybe sometimes love looked like staying away. I thought about my mother, alone in that house in Salem, tending roses my father had planted 20 years ago. She'd kept those letters all this time, made Margaret promise to wait until I was ready. She'd carried the weight of his secret, protecting me from a truth that might have broken me when I was younger. How many Sunday phone calls had she endured, hearing the hurt in my voice when I talked about feeling abandoned, knowing she could fix it with a few words but believing, like my father had, that some truths require timing? My hands shook as I dialed her number. Emma? Are you okay? You sound. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Did you know Dad was sick when he left? The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Oh, sweetheart. You found them, didn't you? The letters. Why didn't you tell me? The question came out broken, desperate. Because you were 12 years old and your father was disappearing a little more each day. Because watching someone you love fade away piece by piece is something no child should have to carry. Because he begged me to let you remember him whole. I was crying again, 18 years of misplaced anger dissolving into grief for what we'd all sacrificed. I hated him, Mom. I hated him for leaving us. I know, baby. And he knew too. He'd rather have you hate him than pity him. He'd rather be the villain in your story than the victim. But I built my whole life around not trusting people. I've pushed away everyone who tried to love me because I thought that's what people do, they leave. And now? I looked at the storage facility, at Unit 247 where my father's love had been waiting patiently for 18 years. Now I think maybe some people leave because they love you too much to stay. And maybe some people stick around even when loving them feels impossible. Are you going to open it? The storage unit? I took a shaking breath. This was the choice that would change everything. I could drive away and keep my carefully constructed walls intact, or I could walk into that unit and let my father love me from beyond the grave. Let myself feel the full weight of being cherished by someone who'd chosen suffering over causing me pain. Yeah, Mom. I think I'm ready to let him give me all those missed birthdays. He would be so proud of who you've become, Emma. So proud. I wiped my eyes, pocketed my phone, and got out of the car. The storage facility stretched ahead of me like a bridge between who I'd been and who I might become if I was brave enough to cross it. Unit 247 waited in silence, holding 18 years' worth of a father's love that had never wavered, never dimmed, never stopped believing that someday his daughter would be strong enough to receive it. I slipped the key into the lock and turned it. The storage unit door rolled up with a metallic screech that seemed to echo through my entire past. Inside, boxes lined the walls like 18 years of Christmas mornings I'd never had. Margaret stepped up beside me, her presence steady and warm. He organized everything by year, she said softly. Start with the box marked 1995, that's the year he left. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside were school photos I'd forgotten existed, pictures my mother must have somehow gotten to him. My 7th grade soccer team photo sat on top, and written on the back in his careful handwriting, Emma scored the winning goal. I wasn't there to see it, but I'm so proud. I moved to the next box. 8th grade. A newspaper clipping from the school art fair where I'd won first place, his note in the margin, she has my grandmother's artistic eye. I wish I could tell her about the painting Grandma left in the attic. 9th grade brought a dried corsage, somehow he'd gotten one identical to what I'd worn to my first dance. The card read, I hope whoever took you was a gentleman. I hope you laughed until your cheeks hurt. By 10th grade, I was sobbing. Margaret's arm came around my shoulders as I found my driver's license photo, the awful one I'd thought no one but the DMV would ever see. How did he get this? I choked out. Your mother. She sent him copies of everything that mattered. She was angry, but she wasn't cruel. She knew you'd want to know someday that he never stopped being your father. The final box was marked 2006, the year he died. On top was a video camera with a note taped to it, for Emma, on her 30th birthday. With shaking hands, I pressed play. My father's face filled the small screen, thinner than I remembered, but his eyes still held that warm crinkle when he smiled. He was sitting in what looked like a hospital bed, but his voice was strong. Emma, my beautiful girl. If you're watching this, it means Margaret kept her promise and you're ready to hear the truth. I didn't leave because I didn't love you. I left because I loved you too much to make you watch me disappear piece by piece. I sank to the concrete floor, clutching the camera like a lifeline. I wanted to stay so badly that some nights I'd drive to our street just to see your bedroom light on, just to know you were safe and doing homework and being the amazing person I knew you'd become. But then I'd remember the look on your face when I couldn't make it to your soccer games anymore. How confused you were when I started getting too tired to help with your math homework. His image wavered through my tears. I couldn't bear the thought of you watching your daddy fade away. I wanted your last memory of me to be strong, healthy, maybe a little annoying when I made you clean your room. He laughed, and the sound broke my heart. I wanted to be the father who left too early, not the one who stayed too long. I drove straight from the storage unit to my childhood home, the video camera still clutched in my hands. Mom was in the garden, kneeling by the rose bushes Dad had planted our first spring in the house. She looked up when my car door slammed, and I saw 18 years of held breath release from her shoulders. "You watched it," she said. It wasn't a question. "Why didn't you tell me you were still in contact with him?" She stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "Because you needed to be angry at someone, and it was easier to let you be angry at him than at cancer. At least anger at him felt like something you could control." I walked to her, this woman who'd carried impossible secrets to protect me. "I'm sorry, Mom. For all the ways I blamed you. For all the Sunday calls where I was cold and distant because I thought you'd let him leave without fighting." She pulled me into her arms, and for the first time in 18 years, I didn't pull away. "We both did what we thought was best," she whispered. "And maybe we were wrong, but we loved you through it." Standing in my father's garden, holding the mother who'd chosen to be the villain in my story rather than let me hate a dead man, I finally understood what love really looked like. Sometimes it looked like leaving. Sometimes it looked like staying silent. Sometimes it looked like letting someone be angry at you instead of at circumstances beyond anyone's control. And sometimes, it looked like forgiveness. That was 6 months ago, and I need you to understand, I'm not the same person who opened that package. I can't be. When you discover that everything you built your life on was a misunderstanding, you don't just adjust a few things. You rebuild from the ground up. The first thing that changed was how I sleep. For 18 years, I'd been a restless sleeper, always ready to bolt, even in dreams. Now I wake up next to Jake. Yes, we moved in together 3 months ago, and I don't automatically scan for exits. I let myself sink into the mattress, into the trust that he'll still be there when I open my eyes. Jake noticed the change before I did. "You used to hold yourself like you were ready to run," he told me. "Now you hold yourself like you're home." The second thing was my mother. We talk 3 times a week now, real conversations where I ask about her day and actually listen to the answers. Last month, she mentioned she'd been thinking about repainting the kitchen, and instead of changing the subject like I always used to, I offered to help. We spent a weekend covered in yellow paint, laughing about how Dad always said he could paint a room in 2 hours and then take 6. We talk about him now. Not just the cancer and the leaving, but the before. How he'd sing off-key while making pancakes on Sundays. How he'd sneak me extra cookies when Mom wasn't looking. How he'd read me bedtime stories with different voices for every character until I was way too old for bedtime stories but too enchanted to ask him to stop. My mother kept one of his letters on her nightstand, the one where he wrote about hoping I'd inherited his love of old movies and terrible puns. Turns out I did inherit both, along with his stubborn streak and his habit of humming while I work. I'm back in therapy, but Dr. Chin says it's like working with a completely different person. "You used to talk about relationships like they were ticking bombs," she observed last week. "Now you talk about them like they're gardens that need tending." And that's exactly how it feels. I used to think love was about holding so tight that people couldn't escape. Now I understand it's about holding gently enough that they choose to stay. My father taught me that, not through his words, but through his sacrifice. He loved me enough to let me hate him if it meant I'd be whole. I've started volunteering at the hospice where Margaret still works part-time. There's something healing about helping other families navigate impossible choices, about being living proof that love sometimes looks nothing like what we expect it to. Last week, a 12-year-old girl asked me if her dad would still love her from heaven. I showed her the video on my phone, the one where my father says he'll be cheering me on from wherever he ends up. Her face lit up like I'd given her the most precious gift in the world. Maybe I had. The biggest change is this: I believe in meant to be now. Not in some mystical, everything happens for a reason way, but in the simple truth that sometimes the universe conspires to heal us when we're finally ready to be healed. That package wasn't really misdelivered. Margaret later admitted she'd mixed up the apartment numbers on purpose. Your father said when you were ready, you'd find a way, she told me. I just gave fate a little nudge. Some mornings, I catch myself humming while I make coffee, the same off-key tune my dad used to sing during those Sunday pancake breakfasts. Jake teases me about it, says I sound just like someone he never met but somehow feels like he knows. And maybe that's the most beautiful part of all this: my father is still here, woven into who I'm becoming, teaching me daily that love doesn't end with death or distance or even our own stubborn misunderstanding of it. I'm not the woman who was too afraid to love fully. I'm my father's daughter, and I finally know what that means. So here I am again, standing in my childhood bedroom, holding a letter in my father's handwriting. But this time, everything is different. The room still smells like lavender and cedar, but now it's a comfort instead of a trigger. The walls that once echoed with my childhood tears now hold Jake's laughter as he helps my mother hang new curtains, the ones we picked out together last weekend. The letter in my hands isn't one of those 15 revelations that shattered my world. It's one I wrote to him yesterday, telling him about the engagement ring Jake showed me, asking for his blessing even though I know he can't answer. But maybe he already did. Margaret says some people believe our loved ones find ways to reach us when we need them most. I used to think that was wishful thinking. Now I think about a UPS driver who couldn't read apartment numbers, a hospice nurse who decided 30 years was long enough to keep a secret, and a father who loved me enough to let me go so completely that finding my way back felt like a miracle. Downstairs, I hear Jake and Mom making Dad's favorite cookies from a recipe she found in his final letter. The house fills with the scent of cinnamon and brown sugar, and for the first time in 18 years, it feels like home instead of a museum of abandonment. There's a knock at the front door, probably Jake's parents arriving for Sunday dinner. But I don't freeze anymore when I hear unexpected knocks. I've learned that sometimes the most beautiful surprises arrive disguised as interruptions, as mistakes, as packages meant for someone else. I fold my letter carefully and tuck it into the jewelry box that started everything. Tomorrow I'll take it to Dad's grave, along with all the stories he missed and all the love I finally understand how to receive. Because sometimes the smallest accidents create the biggest miracles. Sometimes what feels like the end is actually the beginning of finding your way home. And sometimes, just sometimes, love finds a way to deliver itself exactly when and where it needs to be. Even if the address is wrong.